The range of awesome mountains which separates Switzerland from its French, Italian and Austrian neighbours divides the country from east to west in an unbroken chain. It's a forbidding, ice-bound land where the succession of 3,000 to 4,000 metre peaks forms an impenetrable barrier, or so it seems. Amazingly, there is one thread of continuity in this tortured landscape which unites the scattered alpine communities. A metre-gauge railway line extends over the 290 kilometres between the mountain resorts of Zermatt and St. Moritz. Only one train makes the entire journey each day. It's a famous train, full of romance and glamour, almost a legend in its own time. The wonderful, incomparable Glacier Express. In a land of glaciers, only one was of exceptional prominence to railway passengers. I say was, because trains no longer parade in front of the gigantic Rhone Glacier, which gave the Glacier Express its name. The line over the Furka Pass was fraught with working difficulties, and its summer-only operation was replaced in 1982 by the Furka-based tunnel, which has enabled the Glacier Express to run all year round. However, there are now plans to reopen the old line with steam locomotives in 1991. But our story begins at the western terminus of the line in Zermatt. Until the turn of the century, Zermatt was a tiny village of old wooden dwellings. Then the lure of the Alps began to attract British tourists and climbers. Despite its subsequent growth, the municipality makes one concession to its heritage. Present-day visitors must leave their cars some kilometers to the north in an immense and rather expensive car park and travel the rest of the distance by train. This mild irritation, the expense not the pollution-free principle, is dispelled by the sight of one of the world's most beautiful mountains, the majestic Matterhorn. The distinctive 4,478-metre peak is now assailed by over 3,000 climbers each summer. Perhaps some of them remember the first ill-fated expedition in July 1865, which claimed the lives of 4 of the 7 mountaineers. When the weather is clear, visitors gather at the Gornergratbahn station in Zermatt from 7 o'clock in the morning for the 9-kilometre climb to 3,089 metres. This is the highest railway line in open terrain in Europe. 3-phase current at 750 volts is used to power the trains, and the rail cars have tiny twin pantographs to collect the electricity to turn the wheels at a steady 14 kilometers per hour. The railway was built in 1898, but the modern design of rail car dates from 1947, when the line began winter operations for the first time. Across the traffic-free street from the Gornergratbahn station is the starting point for the Glacier Express to St. Moritz. In summer, the train runs in 3 or 4 sections, and a few minutes before 9 o'clock in the morning, the first Glacier Express of the day slips quietly, almost without notice, out of the concrete-roofed station of the Brigg-Visp-Zermatt Railway. It will be 5 o'clock in the afternoon when her passengers are finally decanted in St. Moritz. Ahead lies one of the most difficult and improbable railway lines in the world. Its 8-hour journey over nearly 300 mountainous kilometers will take the train over one bridge for every kilometer traveled and through 90 tunnels. Many of the steeper gradients require rack assistance, including 7.7 of the next 35 kilometers to Visp, where the steepest section is 1 in 8. The ravine north of Zermatt is shared by the access road, river and the railway, which clings to the mountainside. Snowshed protection is indispensable on the more vulnerable sections of the line. Insect life abounds in the luxuriant undergrowth, and occasionally a stray fly finds its way into the viewfinder. There is an intensive shuttle service between Zermatt and the end of the normal road in Teisch. Zermatt's pollution-free policy brings a lot of business to the Brigg-Visp-Zermatt Railway, and the capacious shuttle trains are well patronized. The newest passenger cars have wide automatic doors for ease of access. This rather forlorn example is waiting on a standard gauge wagon at Visp to go for repair following a slight brush with another train. The shuttle trains provide a service every 20 minutes through the gorge, which opens into a wide valley at Teiche. The railway's two ABDEH 66 articulated rail cars, built in 1960, are fully occupied on the early morning to late night shuttles. The Visp-Zermatt Railway was opened in 1891, and steam engines were the sole source of power until 1930, when the section between Visp and Brig was inaugurated. This new section had electric supply from the start, and the company changed its name to the full Brig-Visp-Zermatt Bahn at the same time. The rest of the railway came under wires in the same year. The 5 HGE 44 Crocodile locomotives, built in 1929 and 1930, still carry the VZ letters of the old company. These locomotives really resemble the Crocodile locomotives of the Swiss Federal Railways in shape only, as their frames are rigid and totally without articulation. They are the mainstay of the railway's intensive freight services. There are a dozen or so freight trains over the entire 44-kilometre length of the BVZ every day from Monday to Friday. Many of them consist of just a few wagons containing loads of a similar type for specific destinations. Only one freight train a day in each direction calls at all 9 stations on the line, and here they're crossing at Calpatran. Their most important payload is mail, and both trains contain vans for the collection, sorting and distribution of letters and parcels. In the depth of winter, the railway is the only form of transport which can provide a totally reliable service independent of the weather, hence its role as the nation's mail carrier. Longer, heavier freight trains do trundle along the meter gauge line, and the 47-ton Crocodile locomotives are quite powerful, being capable of 45 kilometers an hour on the adhesion sections and 25 kilometers per hour on the rack. Not all freight trains are hauled by the Crocodile locomotives. This short train at Stalden has one of the line's 4 DEH 44 locomotives at the head. The DEH 44s are equally at home on passenger trains. Indeed, they are the fastest locomotives on the BVZ, capable of 65 kilometers per hour on the level and 35 kilometers per hour when assisted by a rack. They were built in 1975 and 1976, and their unique design incorporates a large baggage area. The dark wooden hut is typical of this region, being mounted on stone mushrooms to keep it clear of winter snows. The Glacier Express is usually hauled by one of 3 enormously long ABDEH 88 locomotives. These are centrally articulated, and the 36-metre long body contains seating for 108 travellers. They were built by SLM in 1964. The operation of a single-track line with long, slow rack sections and up to 3 trains an hour in each direction requires excellent planning and careful timekeeping. It also requires many passing places, and most train meets take place at main stations, so that waiting time can be usefully deployed in loading and unloading. This is the village of Randa, which was totally destroyed by air pressure alone in 1819, when the Weisshorn Glacier plunged into the Nikolai Valley, half an hour's journey away. Also demolished in an avalanche in 1747 was the church at St. Niklaus, which was reconstructed in Baroque style near the picturesque railway station where passengers are awaiting the Glacier Express. The Glacier Express is now negotiating the Kipfer Gorge. The tiny train is completely dominated by the landscape, and we can only wonder at the determination of the pioneers whose temerity created the railway in such a forbidding place. Totally unconcerned by the overwhelming scenery, the train rolls on at a steady 45 kilometers per hour. Like all Glacier Expresses, it comprises carriages from the three railways responsible for the route to St. Moritz: the Rätische Bahn, the Furka-Oberalp Railway, and the Brig-Visp-Zermatt-Bahn. The final descent towards Visp and the Rhone Valley is accomplished by means of a steep rack section. This train is being controlled from a cab at the end of the leading carriage, and the locomotive is bringing up the rear. A quaint Baroque chapel alongside an ancient stone bridge near Neubruck provides one of the most well-remembered sights along the railway. At Visp, trains take a sharp right-hand turn to head eastward along the Rhone Valley. Visp is also the point where the narrow gauge rails of the BVZ and the standard gauge line of the Swiss Federal Railway come together. The station's TE3 shunting locomotive is over 40 years old, and this AE66 locomotive, displaced from freight service on the steeply graded Gotthard route with the introduction of more powerful locomotives, is no youngster either. This, however, is the newest which Switzerland has to offer. The RE444 class is a familiar sight in Visp. This train is a Geneva Airport to Ventimiglia Express. Visp is also home for the BVZ's only remaining steam engine, Breithorn. She was built in 1906 by the Schweizerische Lokomotive- und Maschinenfabrik. The locomotive weighs nearly 32 tons and has a maximum speed of 40 kilometers per hour on the level and just 12 on the rack. Although she was totally renovated some years ago, she's on her way to the workshops once more for essential engineering work. Two small diesel engines take care of the shunting in Visp. This is the GM33, built by Moyes in 1975. And this smaller locomotive was constructed by Deutz in 1972. In the yard is a reminder of winter conditions in Switzerland, with the railway's 3 snow-clearing devices. For 9 kilometers from Visp to Brig, the BVZ and the SBB main line run in parallel, although trains seldom race side by side. The 45 km per hour Crocodile is of course no match for the 140 km per hour RE442. Another line, high on the mountainside above the new BVZ depot, is also heading for Brig. This is the Bern-Lurchburg-Simplon Railway. The train is destined for Milan. The depot is only 2 years old, and its construction has eased problems of congestion in Brig. The locomotive is a 30-year-old TM22 tractor. 1 hour and 20 minutes after leaving Zermatt, the Glacier Express glides into the station at Brig, which is jointly owned by the BVZ and Furka-Oberalp Railways. Across the road, at a much higher level, is the mainline station shared by the Swiss Federal Railways and the Bern-Lurchburg Simplon Railway. Brig is a gateway to Italy. At the east end of the station lies the entrance to the famous Simplon Tunnel. The Italian border is inside the 19.8-kilometer tunnel, which is the longest in Europe. The standard and narrow gauge railway stations in Brig are alongside each other but on different levels. Plans are being developed for a new joint station which would provide the narrow gauge trains with more space. In the meantime, platform space is at a premium and the small engine shed is crammed with locomotives. Shunting in the station area is a task allotted to a 41-year-old TE22 locomotive. The locomotive backing down onto the Glacier Express is much more modern. The railway took delivery of its first HGE 442 locomotive in 1985. It's a fast and powerful design, capable of hauling 120 tons at 30 kilometers per hour on the steep rack-assisted gradients and 90 kilometers per hour through the Furka-based tunnel. Over the remainder of the railway, they are limited to 55 kilometers per hour. Also new is the Furka Oberalp's first panorama car, which was built by the railway on a previously used passenger car underframe. The high, wide windows with angled top lights provide a wonderful view and a light, airy interior. Although designated second class, a supplement is charged to travel in what can only be described as luxurious accommodation. The panorama car is often used in group and charter service. As the Glacier Express leaves Brig, it turns sharply under the standard gauge bridge before crossing the River Rhone on a long iron bridge. The trains of the Bern-Lurchburg Simplon Railway also cross the river on a bridge of similar design. At 672 meters above sea level, Brig is the lowest point on the Furka Oberalp Railway. As the train turns eastwards towards the Goms, the climb which will eventually take the railway to over 2,000 meters begins. The entrance to the rapidly narrowing valley is protected by the disused Hohenfluh Chapel. The altar in the chapel was carved by the famous sculptor Anton Sigriston. Most Swiss railways undergo a continual process of upgrading, and the Furka Oberalpbahn is no exception. The track layout at Morel, the first regularly used passing place, has been redesigned to increase operational flexibility. A few weeks after these pictures were taken in 1987, the railway was ripped asunder by an immense rainstorm, and much rebuilding was necessary. This work train is hauled by one of 5 electric rail cars built in 1942 for the electrification of the railway. The large lettering is experimental and is in white on one side of the car and yellow on the other. The early rail cars were ousted from regular service in the 1970s by a new design of luggage and light freight carrying rail cars, which often run in partnership with trailer coaches fitted with driving controls. There is barely sufficient room in the steep-sided gorge between Morrell and Grengiols for the river, road and railway, which is forced onto a ledge supported by many stone arches. The difficult terrain is conquered only by means of steep gradients and frequent bridges, none more graceful than the Nussbaumer Arch across the Rhone at Betten. Just beyond the bridge, the Glacier Express enters its first rack section since Stalden on the Brigg-Visp-Zermatt railway. Just a short distance along the rack is a joint cable car and railway station. The Bettmeralp cable car whisks passengers to 1,950 metres, a 2.5-kilometre journey accomplished in 10 minutes. The train negotiates the kilometre-long rack section at a very reasonable 35 kilometres per hour. The gradient eases through Grengiol station and then stiffens again as the train crosses a 168-metre-long viaduct over the Rhone and plunges into the Deichberg tunnel. This describes a spiral inside the mountain to gain height, and the trains emerge directly above the viaduct, but 90 metres higher, having travelled 590 metres in the tunnel. The train now approaching the tunnel on the higher level is representative of the everyday regional services on the Furka Oberalp. 1 minute after plunging into the tunnel, the train emerges from the rock face. It's being driven from the trailer, and the locomotive propelling the train is one of 4 DEH-44 rail cars built for the railway in 1979. Like most rail cars and locomotives on the FO, it carries the name of one of the places on the line. This one is Gerschenen, and the others are Realp, Oberwald and Fisch. The Glacier Express makes very few stops on its long journey, and its demanding schedule requires locomotive rather than rail car haulage. The new HGE 442 locomotives are to gradually replace an older type of HGE 44 ancestor, which has been the mainstay of long-distance passenger haul trains on the FO since electrification. These beautiful old locomotives, like the one descending the rack towards Fisch, have a history almost as long as the Glacier Express itself, which was inaugurated in 1930. The first of the class of 7 HGE 44s arrived in 1940, and the last in 1956. Fisch is the main holiday playground in the Goms. The sky is crisscrossed by cable cars, hang gliding enthusiasts, and, the latest in alpine sports, mountain parachuting. The area is very popular with the Dutch, as this warning notice testifies. The station building is not very Swiss in character, having been built by French contractors in 1911. Movements in the station area are controlled by the station master, or in this case, by the station mistress. Flesch is an important passing place, and with the kind of impeccable timekeeping which occurs every hour or so, the train for Brig arrives just as the Andermatt train is ready for departure. The valley eastwards towards Oberwald becomes progressively more remote, yet the inhabitants enjoy an hourly railway service throughout the day. This is Niederwald, where the characteristic dark wood houses of the Upper Goms nestle around the church as though seeking protection from the elements. As soon as the Göschenen to Brig regional train has come to a halt, the eastbound Glacier Express appears on the horizon. There are freight trains on the Furka-Oberalp Railway, but they're few and far between, and freight is not such an important revenue earner as on the Brig-Visp-Zermatt Railway. Wooden-covered bridges such as this one across the infant River Rhone in Reckingen can be found in various regions of Switzerland. Once again, the station building itself is more typical of French local railways than Swiss, a legacy from the Société de Construction des Batignolles, who built the line. The station is maintained with pride, and every opportunity to beautify the building and the platform is taken with a fervour that only the Swiss seem to have perfected. Everything is located in its place with meticulous precision. The polish on every piece of station paraphernalia reflects the late morning sunshine, and all relevant information is prominently displayed for the benefit of all who should chance to come here. On a summer's day, the scene is idyllic, but this is a fragile environment. The lonely restaurant car, unusually detached here from the westbound Glacier Express, is testimony to a temporary arrangement resulting from a devastating flood which has closed part of the Rätische Bahn many kilometers away. In early August 1987, it was the turn of the Goms to suffer devastation which affected all forms of transport. A flash flood ripped the village of Munster completely in two. The savage stream swept away everything in its path. Boulders the size of motor cars snatched buildings from their foundations, and in one night of utter climatic madness, unlike anything in living memory, all normal means of communication ceased. In the silence of morning, the shocked inhabitants surveyed their tortured village and the place where the railway had been only a few hours before. The rails were gone, masts twisted like a child's toy, embankments swept away, and cuttings filled with debris. It was to be 6 weeks before the army restored normal railway working in the Goms. Of course, the Furka Oberalp is quite used to difficult conditions, and its line over the Furka Pass always required some rebuilding after its winter closure. For both strategic and social reasons, a summer-only railway was never very satisfactory. The solution was bold: a tunnel under the Alps, which at 15.4 kilometers was to be the longest narrow-gauge tunnel in the world. It took nearly 9 years to complete the bore, through some of the most unstable rock in Europe. With unerring precision, when the two ends met in the middle, they were only out of line by 37 millimeters laterally and 4 millimeters vertically. The new car-carrying trains, or car ferries as they are called, sweep through the mountain at 90 kilometers per hour, and two long passing places in the tunnel allow for uninterrupted service. Although this is only a meter-gauge railway, quite large lorries and coaches can benefit from the half-hourly winter and hourly summer schedule. Car passengers stay in their vehicles for the trip, and hikers and motorcyclists take refuge in specially designed accommodation at the end of the train. The two GE44 locomotives were built by SLM with Brown Boveri electric components. The design incorporates state-of-the-art thyristor technology, and large roof hatches allow internal equipment to be changed quickly. It's all a far cry from how things used to be here in Oberwald. From the 30th of June 1914, the railway took off into the mountains from this spot. For the next 28 years, the bark of steam engines echoed around the peaks, before the grinding electric locomotives replaced them in 1942. Most of the steam engines were sold in the Far East, but several remain in Switzerland. If the latest plan comes to fruition, and there is every indication that it will, the ghosts of steam engines which haunt the Furka Pass will be replaced by a reincarnated railway. Glacier, which was the provisional terminus of the line from Brig for 12 years, now houses the engineering headquarters of the Dampfbahn Furka Bergstrecke, whose intention is to reopen the line in 1991 with steam engines repurchased from Saigon and exhumed from museums. There are, of course, one or two obstacles to overcome. The road crossings in Glacier and on the Pass Road must be replaced, but it is likely that the Army's Railway Corps will undertake some rebuilding as a training exercise. The sheer scale of the project is overwhelming. Even in early summer, the old alignment is blocked with snow, and the accumulated damage of 5 years is extensive. Significant progress has been made, however, particularly on the eastern slope of the Furka Pass. The sound of a rail-borne engine once again shatters the peace. The tiny works locomotive has a big brother. Until 1986, this diesel locomotive was engaged underground in Zurich in construction work for the city's new railway system. It was acquired for the Furka project, given a larger cab and re-gauged to run on the narrow track. Today's task is the transportation of cement for tunnel rebuilding. The track is in place right across the Furka, and most of it is in reasonable condition. Who can doubt that determined efforts like this will bring success to the project? And once again in 1991, passengers will have the opportunity to view the magnificent Rhone Glacier. No doubt the Glacier Express will continue to run through the base tunnel, but neither the Furka Oberalp or the new railway can ignore the exciting potential of a combined tourist operation of some kind. At 2,163 meters above sea level, the Furka Pass tunnel was the highest point on the route of the Glacier Express. This is avalanche territory, and in autumn, the railway administration had the overhead wire and catenary supports removed to a safe place. The famous Steffenbach Bridge lies in a regular avalanche path, and is designed so that the girder support can be pushed back onto the abutments to avoid damage. It's easy to understand why the nation supported an alternative all-weather solution to the problems of operating the Furka-Oberalp Railway in the form of a base tunnel. It takes just 20 minutes or less to pass through the 15.5-kilometre tunnel, against 70 minutes for the old 18-kilometre route over the pass. From Realp, at the eastern end of the Furka base tunnel, trains have a respite as they negotiate the level route through the U-shaped Usseren Valley to Andermatt. At least, the route is not arduous in summer, but when the winter snows arrive, it can be formidable at times. With the exception of temporary interruptions to traffic through unpredictable avalanches, the Glacier Express runs throughout the year. In the more vulnerable places, such as here in the Oberalp Pass, snow sheds and galleries protect trains from sliding snow. The railway age was preceded by the era of the horse-drawn mail coach, and if you're so inclined and can afford the fee, you can retrace the ancient wheel tracks from Lugano to Fluellen over the St. Gotthard Pass through Andermatt, where the Gotthard dissects the route of the Glacier Express. "330 metres directly below the village is the Gotthard Tunnel of the Swiss Federal Railway and the much newer motorway tunnel. The old road clawed its way over the 2,100-metre St. Gotthard Pass. From Andermatt to Gerschenen, the road through the awesome Schörlenen Gorge was particularly difficult. It was said that the original bridge on this spot could only have been built with the devil's help. Since the 12th of July 1917, there has been a railway through the Schörlenen Gorge between Gerschenen and Andermatt. Until 1961, it operated as an independent railway. Following its subsequent merger with the Furka-Oberalp Railway, its rolling stock took on the corporate image of the larger company. Nearly all of the 3.7-kilometre line through the fearsome gorge requires rack assistance. In high summer, the first eastbound Glacier Express of the day leaves Andermatt at 11:54 a.m. The train is crowded, and the restaurant car is fully booked. The stiff climb over the Oberalp Pass begins as soon as the train leaves the station. There are 600 meters in height to be gained in the next 9 kilometers. The train, which is renowned for being the slowest express in the world, grinds its way steadily up the mountainside, much of its gyration in full view of Andermatt. The high alpine scenery around Andermatt is simply magnificent, and these passengers are enjoying one of the world's most spectacular railway journeys. The descent to Andermatt on the open mountainside is undertaken with great care. There is a great strain on equipment, but should a coupling snap, the automatic brake will prevent a runaway. The locomotive slowly propelling this train is one of 5 DEH-44 luggage-carrying rail cars, built for the railway in the mid-1970s. Eventually, Andermatt, which has been visible to passengers for nearly 15 minutes, is reached. The deep blue Oberalp Lake which teems with young trout, marks the highest point of the present-day route of the Glacier Express. The Rhine begins its 1,320-kilometre journey to the North Sea in these mountains, and the train and river will keep each other company for the next 90 kilometres to Reichenau. The eastern descent from the 2,033-metre Oberalp Pass is somewhat easier, and the Glacier Express sweeps over a succession of graceful viaducts. In Disentis, an 8th century Benedictine abbey with twin Baroque towers stands high above the railway station, which marks the end-on connection between the Furka Oberalp and Rhaetian railways. Here, locomotives are exchanged, and fuel for the passengers is taken on board. This Glacier Express left St. Moritz 3.5 hours ago at 8:35 in the morning. When the summer storms brought the line to a halt in 1987, one locomotive became isolated at Disentis. It found employment maintaining a skeleton service to Trun. The temporary terminus for the Glacier Express was Tavernasa, and passengers were conveyed around the blockage in a fleet of hired post buses. Tourists didn't take to this arrangement with any enthusiasm, and this Glacier Express, emerging from the Rhine Gorge towards Ilans, is practically empty. The scale of destruction in 1987 was nothing compared to the cataclysm which created this valley in prehistoric times. A huge landslip forced the river into a new course, and the raging waters scoured this 300-metre canyon, now shared by the railway and the River Rhine. In the depths of the chasm is the station of Valendas-Sagoin. Freight traffic such as cement, mineral water and agricultural produce form a major part of the Rhaetische Bahn's income, and several trains a day call at all stations along the line to collect the loaded wagons. Near Reichenau, the line crosses the confluence of the Vorderrhein and the Hinterrhein on a long iron bridge. Reichenau is the junction between the line we've been following from Disentis and the line from St. Moritz to Chur, the capital of Canton Graubünden, which lies just 14 kilometers to the east. A reversal is required, and coaches travelling the whole distance between Zermatt and St. Moritz are detached here to join the next through train to their destination. The Glacier Express is no exception. A beautiful red articulated locomotive backs onto today's Glacier Express from Zermatt to collect the coaches for St. Moritz. Seconds later, these are shunted onto coaches from Chur, and the train prepares to depart. Number 704 is a GE 66 type locomotive built for the RHB in 1965. These powerful locomotives can haul long trains over the stiff gradients of the Albula Pass without rack assistance. From Reichenau, the railway heads due south towards St. Moritz, 111 kilometers away and 1,171 meters higher. The Hinterrhein Valley is strewn with castles, like the one at Resunz, which was first mentioned in records in 1288. The massive Ortenstein Castle is the largest in a chain of over 20 castles and ruins, which are dotted on rocky ledges throughout the valley. Thusis is the limit of commuter services from Chur, and the village stands at the very edge of the Alps and at the beginning of the RHB's famous Albula line. This train, passing through Sarava, is hauled by a 40-year-old GE 441 locomotive. The first coach is one of the railway's beautiful Pullman cars. One of the most incredible feats of railway engineering in Switzerland is the Landwasser Viaduct. 5 piers carry the railway 65 meters above the river, and the mouth of the Landwasser tunnel is cut into the rock wall at its southern end. Glacier is a major crossing place and a junction for the branch line through the mountains to Davos, from where it's possible to travel in a large circle by train to Landquart and Chur. This branch line train has a brand new GE 442 locomotive in charge. Bergun is the last stop before the mountain barricade ahead. Trains on the Rätische do not have the benefit of rack assistance on gradients, which have now stiffened to 35 in 1000. The distance as the crow flies between Bergun and the line summit at Preda is 6 kilometers. But trains must twist and weave their way over 12.6 kilometers of track to conquer a height difference of 416 meters. This mixed passenger and freight train is climbing the slopes beyond Bergun, which connect Val Thoros with Val Tisch by means of 3 long loops. A more difficult landscape through which to build a railway is hard to imagine. It took 5,300 men nearly 6 years to construct the line, which was opened in 1904 and electrified in 1919. Many loops, spiral tunnels and viaducts were needed to penetrate this alpine wilderness. In fact, there are 50 viaducts, totaling 2.7 kilometers in length, and 39 tunnels on the Albula line. For the traveler, the changing scenery becomes very confusing, as views which first appeared on one side of the train reappear on the opposite side, as trains spiral their way ever upwards, sometimes inside the mountain, and sometimes on long loops in the open. In winter, the road between Preda and Bergun is transformed into the largest prepared toboggan run in Europe. In the short alpine summer, vehicles struggle over the 2,315-metre Albula Pass road. But 526 metres below, the railway has an easier passage through the Albula Tunnel. This is the highest railway tunnel in the Alps, and the 6-kilometre bore was one of the most troublesome to construct. The original Italian contractors gave up when they became unequal to the task. But finally, the tunnel was completed by the railway staff, and on the 10th of July 1904, the first train ran through. The train emerging from the tunnel now is an historic reminder of days gone by. The GE 661 Crocodile locomotive is over 60 years old, and the train consists of the RHB's 6 splendid red and cream luxury saloon cars. The chocolate brown locomotive number 412 first saw service on the railway on the 27th of November 1925 as one of a class of 15 locomotives. Only a few now remain in service, and 412 is a popular choice for the railway's nostalgic special trains like this one. In the gathering gloom of a rain-swept July evening, the nostalgic train winds its way slowly back to its base in Landquart. The saloon cars date from the early 30s, and they are famous for their use by General Guisan for a wartime inspection of Graubunden's railways. Following 10 minutes of darkness in the Albula Tunnel, trains burst into the soft light of Val-Beffa, an Engadine side valley just a few kilometers from the end of the route of the Glacier Express at St. Moritz. The language here is Romansh, and the station architecture in this high Swiss valley reflects its social heritage. The facilities are much the same as they have always been, and horse and cart is the normal Sunday transport to the nearby restaurant. Cars can reach Spinas, but only with the purchase of a costly permit. The cantonal flag flies in the station garden, and its rather more colourful companions indicate that the present occupants of the station flat have an oriental background. The Rätische Bahn is one of Switzerland's most important railways, and the only narrow-gauge transalpine route. The size of one of the line's work trains reflects the maintenance demands made by a 375-kilometre network with 500 bridges and 40 kilometres of tunnels. 7.5 million passengers and 750,000 tons of freight are carried annually. 100 locomotives haul 270 passenger coaches and 1,000 freight wagons. The railway employs 1,400 people, but for all its size and efficiency, it has not overlooked its history. Twice a year, preserved steam engine number 108 is brought out of storage for an enthusiast's special train. The train leaves the route of the Glacier Express at Beffa for a 2-hour trip along the Engadine to Skål, near the Austrian border. When the line was opened in 1913, it was intended that it should eventually be extended to Landeck in Austria, but this plan never came to fruition. Only 2 steam locomotives remain on the RHB from a fleet which once numbered 58. Number 108 was built in 1906. She has a top speed of 45 kilometers per hour and can handle 95 tons at 35 kilometers per hour on the line's steepest gradients. At the end of her 80-kilometer run along the Engadine, the rejuvenated engine steers her well-patronized train into a siding at Skål. In the late afternoon, the steam special returns to St. Moritz with her cargo of satisfied enthusiasts. The long summer's day is nearly at an end, and two elderly rail cars also return to St. Moritz from the rambling Bernina branch line with a terminus at Tirano in Italy. Her payload includes 3 open panorama wagons, which are regularly used for the 6-hour round trip on fine days. As the terminus for 3 separate lines of the RHB from Tirano, Scuol and Chur, St. Moritz station is a busy place. As the sun begins to set, GE 661 number 705 waits to leave with a 1703 express for Chur, and the train conductor logs the coach numbers well in advance of departure time. At 1622, a semi-fast train from Scuol runs in behind a 40-year-old GE 441. At 1641, 2 rail cars arrive with a Bernina Express from Tirano. A TM22 tractor scuttles constantly around the station, dividing and reassembling trains. At 1643, 2 rail cars, numbers 31 and 32, built to operate the first sections of the Bernina Railway in 1908, combine to haul a short train all the way to Tirano. Our story of the route of the Glacier Express ends at just after 5 o'clock, when the slowest express train in the world arrives behind a green articulated GE 66 locomotive. Those passengers who have made the full 290-kilometer expedition from Zermatt have crossed 300 bridges and 2 alpine passes. They have been conveyed through some of the world's grandest and most fascinating scenery, in a journey connecting the Matterhorn with the Bernina and the River Rhone with the Rhine and the Inn. It has not simply been a journey, it has been a travel experience to relish and savor, an experience which is unique in railway travel. This program can only hint at the wonderful reality which is the Glacier Express. If you have never been fortunate enough to experience this delightful journey yourself, or if the memory of your last trip has begun to fade, I hope that it will not be too long before you can take once more the route of the Glacier Express.